My name is Gavin Evans, and this is my review of The Last of Us Season 1. And this review will have spoilers, so there's your warning. But I've said it a billion times, and I'll say it one more time here. I love The Last of Us. I am a die-hard fan of the games. The first game is pure perfection with amazing writing, memorable characters. It's tense, it's thrilling, it's emotional, it's scary. It's just a masterpiece in every way. Last of Us 2 is even better. It is the greatest story in any medium, period. I just think it's an absolute brilliant, complex, challenging work of art. So I was unbelievably excited for this TV show, and it sucks. It's terrible. Oh my goodness. Let's just get into it, but beginning with the positives. And I've been watching a lot of TV shows recently where it's focusing on one group of characters here, then another group of characters there, and there's just so many characters and so much going on that it can feel messy. And that doesn't mean those shows are automatically bad. In fact, I love lots of them, but I do appreciate the fact that this show is one story focusing on these two main characters. It gets distracted every now and again, but for the most part, it's one story, so I like that. I also thought some of the production design was really impressive. I love how they brought Jackson to life. Very well done. You can tell that they filmed this show in Alberta because it is filled with beautiful landscapes. I live in this province and I went to the set, so they really do capture its beauty incredibly well. I love the look of these giant buildings just covered in plants and the cars being flipped over. It looks very post-apocalyptic. Yes, post-apocalyptic? That's the way to describe it, right? Anyways, I think the visual effects to begin with are really good. I went to the set where there was that giant hole in the middle of the street, and that was just green screen. Really impressive work. The two buildings leaning up against each other was really great. I thought the giraffe scene in the end actually had some terrible CGI. The giraffe was real, but you could tell the background wasn't. It really took me out of the moment, but for the most part, the visual effects were great. I thought the practical effects and the makeup of the clickers was just top notch. They really brought the clickers to life in just a perfect manner, and the actors playing them captured the mannerisms down pat. I also thought the opening of the second episode was really effective. Well, it's in Indonesia, and we got the doctor, and she checks out this infected person with the cordyceps, and her response is bomb the city. This was the one cold opening that really worked. And the show does make a couple good changes from the game. Like, I thought Tess's death in the game was very emotional and very well done, but the way they did it in the show was also fantastic. The infected running over and Tess sacrificing herself, and you've got that cordyceps just putting the fungus in her mouth. It's just really great stuff there, and I thought the characters of Sam and Henry, I'll get to them a bit more later, but they were brought to life perfectly. I thought the fact they made Sam deaf was a great addition, and when Ellie tries to kill Sam, that was great as well. But just about everything else I really hated, especially this version of Joe. Now, I'm going to try my best not to compare it to the game as much as possible, but what I will say is that Joel is a character who at the beginning of the game has his guards fully up. He doesn't let anyone in. He's completely isolated and keeping himself distant from everyone. And then by the end of the game, he's let Ellie in and he's become a warmer person because of it. But you just don't get that Joel here. His guard is never fully up. This season begins and it's confirmed him and Tess are dating. We see that he talks to Bill and Frank. We see that he's trying to reach out to Tommy. So he's already let people into his life. So the entire rate of Ellie coming into his life just doesn't have a fraction of the same impact. And there's just moments where he just opens up way too much. Like, Ellie asks, what happened between you and your brother? And he just tells her everything. And I'm just like, I'm not buying this version of Joel being guarded up. He's way too soft at the start. And we only get one moment in the very first episode where we see him become truly violent. And that's supposed to be a huge aspect of who he is. And then it kind of just vanishes. Like, the brutality and the violence of this world is the point. He has to go to that level to survive. And it's just absent from here. In fact, he gets taken down by this guy who's just a wee lad. And I'm just like, seriously? And they introduce all these factors about how he's aging, his hearing's gone. And I actually don't mind the hearing. I actually think that's a good addition. But him aging, it's just something that's been done in so many stories besides this one. And it just doesn't feel like it's a big part of this character in this show. It feels like it's there for episode 6 and that's it. You know, like, instead of getting stabbed, if he had a heart attack instead, then I'd be like, okay, that was different, but they found a way to change the story in a way that it deals with him aging. But it just feels irrelevant by the end of this season. And Pedro Pascal, I like him in some movies and shows. I think he's absolutely incredible in Game of Thrones. I think he is the best part of Wonder Woman 1984. I thought he was great in Kingsman: The Golden Circle. But in all those performances, he's very talkative. He's very personality filled. He's very out there. And that's just not who Joel is. He was the wrong choice, and I was hoping he could do the rough and gruff guy really well, and he just can't. By the end, I'm like, this is a terrible performance by an actor who's been completely miscasted. When he shoots Marlene at the end and he's just like, you only come after her. There's just no menace there. So, I feel like they completely butchered this character. And then we get to Ellie, who, if you know me, you know is my favorite character, period. I love her. She's filled with depth and nuance. She's funny. She's tragic. She's everything you want a character to be. And here, I just didn't care for her. Now, I'm going to say I have listened to some of the interviews and podcasts with the creators of this show. And I'm going to be honest. Craig Mazin just has a completely different take on Ellie than I do. He always talks about her like she's some sort of a psychopath. And I just don't like that interpretation. I think it's very misguided. And Bella Ramsey, I was optimistic with her. Go back to my review of Catherine called Birdie. Go back to my video where I talk about what I want from The Last of Us. I was optimistic towards this actress, and I don't think she does a good job. There's moments where she's convincing, but for the most part, she's just too over the top or just too flat. Everything with her and David and her yelling at him was so unconvincing. And then her lines in the last episode, like, it can't be for nothing. It's just hollow. It's a very empty performance. Like, I feel like she captured the spirit of her early on, but then after that, she just becomes very one note, and I just never thought she felt authentic. And let me make something clear, this entire story, this entire season is reliant on these two characters and their relationship. And it felt so forced. I didn't buy it for a second. It just moves way too fast. Like they meet each other in episode 1. We got one episode of them and Tess. And then we've got like 10 minutes in episode 3. And then by the end of episode 4, Ellie makes Joel laugh. And it's just, it feels like, oh crap, guys, they want an episode 3. Well, let's just put all of the progression and the development of their relationship in episode 4. And none of it worked. You play the game, it feels authentic. It feels properly built up to. You get none of that here. And I'm just saying, because of that, I have zero interest in watching season 2 because I won't give a shit about what happens. So anyways, then we've got Gabriel Luna as Tommy, and I think he's fine. He doesn't really have a ton to do. Then we've got Maria, who's played by Rutina Weasley, which I'll touch on a bit more later, but I think she was completely miscast, and she just was a very flat performance. She's not bad, but she's not memorable. You've got Molly Dandridge coming back as Marlene, and I think she does a good job. I think it was a good idea to reuse her. I do prefer Marlene's relationship to Ellie in the game, where Ellie knows who she is. There's a bit more of a mother-daughter relationship between the two of them, even though it's not perfect. Then you've got Anna Torv as Tess, and I think she does a good job for the most part. In episode 2, she's great. In episode 1, some of her delivery I'm a bit mixed on. Then we've got Lamar Johnson and Kevin Woodard as Sam and Henry, and I'm going to say right here, these are the two best performances of this season. They really impressed me, and I would have loved it if we got more time with these characters. I thought Sam's deafness was a fresh take on these characters, and they just brought a level of depth and weight to their performances. Really well done. I hope we see them in a lot more movies and shows soon. Then we've got Bill and Frank, which I'll touch on a bit more later, but I do not like their portrayal of these characters. I know everybody's like, oh, their performances are incredible. No. Funny guy from Parks and Recreation cries and everybody loses their mind. Bill is infinitely more complex and nuanced in the games, and here we get a very on-the-nose version of him. And he's supposed to be this hardcore survivalist, but then he sleeps with the first guy he comes across. Isn't his arc supposed to mirror Joel's arc, where he learns to open himself up and trust people, but he trusts Frank immediately, so it just undercuts itself. He's dumb, he shoots at people in the middle of the street, and their entire relationship lacked any bit of chemistry. Love me the way I want you to is just narcissistic. And the fact that their story is so perfect, they live in this perfect neighborhood, just undercuts the urgency and the severity of the post-apocalypse setting. And yeah, I just did not like anything with these two characters, which I'll touch on a bit more later. Kathleen. Melanie Lynskey gives the worst performance. She is atrocious. I could not take her seriously. She is a complete joke. And the characters, I know what they were going for. You wouldn't expect this person to be in charge, but she does so because she's so smart. I'm going to make something perfectly clear. If you don't have some sort of presence, if you don't have some sort of commanding voice, nobody's going to take you seriously, and nobody, and I mean nobody, would follow her. To think otherwise is just naive. And she's stupid. She doesn't need a doctor right this second, so she goes back in and kills the only doctor they have. Whatever. I have rewatched the first episode, and I'm going to be honest, Nico Parker did better than I gave her credit for. I wish she had stronger material, but her performance was good. I think showing the mundaneness of her last day was a bit too much, and her death wasn't as effective as I would have liked, but none of that is on her. And then we've got David, who I'll touch on a bit more later, but Scott Shepherd, who looks like Simon Pegg, but I hated this version of the character. In fact, it's probably my second least favorite performance. They try to make his character more interesting, so they of course have to turn him into a Christian, and the game is a lot more complex and nuanced when it shows just how evil comes from the desire to survive, and how harsh conditions can lead to depravity. While here he's a lot more cliche, and I will discuss the political nature of this show. So there's your warning. Near the end of this video, I will touch on this character a bit more. Then you've got Riley, played by Storm Reed, and she's fine, I guess. We should have seen the death. That's the one improvement they could have done. But yeah, so the cast for the most part, you've got Lamar Johnson and Kieran Woodard, and Molly Dandridge, and maybe Anna Torv and Nico Parker giving the best performances, but the two main ones, the two most important ones, just fell flat for me. And Ellie's immunity is such a big part of the story. It is literally what drives it forward, and you need to show just like that there's infected everywhere. That this immunity means a lot. And by showing almost no clickers, you're just not reminded of the state of the world enough, and because of that, her immunity feels irrelevant. I don't, like, just straight up, like, when you don't see any clickers and this immunity can stop you from becoming a clicker, you just forget about them entirely, making the immunity feel pointless. So, terribly handled, and they try to give it some depth in the last episode, and Ashley Johnson does a good job, but if Marlene knows how she can recreate an immune person, it kind of undercuts the entire show, so it kind of just works better if it was just a miracle. And also, like, the baby gets born in like 2 seconds. But anyways, I also do want to say that this show is like one of the most expensive shows ever. And where did that budget go? Like, I guess you got lots of flipped over cars and all that. But I haven't seen Walking Dead. But it costs like a fraction of what this show cost to make. You got yourself some nice effects early on. But where did the budget go? Truly. Because it's not on screen. This show tries as hard as possible to avoid any action or any horror. And before you type, Gavin, don't you realize it's actually about the characters? Shut the fuck up. I've seen this response time and time again. Yes, the story and characters come first, but the action and the horror are the cherry on top. They're what elevates this story. Otherwise, it's just another cliche post-apocalypse drama. Otherwise, it's just like Logan or The Ward. And the severity of this world, the brutality, is the point, and they just avoid any action. And I know Neil Druckmann has said that, well, they wanted it to come across as realistic. It's a zombie show. It's not realistic. Like, as long as you make your rules early on and you keep the emotion grounded with the two characters, that's the important part. So you can still have Joel hanging upside down. You can still have Joel getting stabbed by rebarb or getting shot instead and surviving or whatever. as long as you set up the rules ahead of time and you keep it grounded in emotion, then it would have worked. And they just don't do that. Like, they're in the mall, and instead of getting chased by a bunch of runners, there's just one. In one store. And it's just, like, if it all built towards the hospital scene, and we get this amazing, 10-minute action sequence while Joel is just being brutal as hell and just killing people in the most horrific of ways and showing zero mercy and just really lean into the violence there, then it would have been, okay, well, they could have had more action throughout, but at least it pays off. But instead we just get this 1-minute sequence where it just cuts to him shooting random people with maybe a little bit of blood. And you're like, really? Like, I just don't understand why you make this show and you avoid any action and horror. And once again, that's what elevates it. So you got strong characters, strong story, emotion, and just these well thought out themes, but then you've also got these tense and thrilling sequences. You've got moments where you're on the edge of your seat where it's tense, and you've just got the whole package. This is why drama is not my favorite movie genre, and why horror is. Like, you got a movie like A Quiet Place, a great movie about a family trying to recover from a loss. And that's a good story on itself, but you add on these monsters that kill anything that makes sound, well, now you got yourself a fantastic movie that really stands out. And this show just feels cliche. It feels like any other generic zombie show. And the pacing is just atrocious. Like, the first episode feels incredibly rushed, and then the third episode is just filler. Oh, but Gavin, the little makes all the difference. No, it spoon feeds you the ideas. And then we got episode 4 where they just try to play catch up, and then 5, you got yourself some action, but it still feels really rushed. And then episode 6 is really boring, but it still feels rushed at the same time. And then 7 focuses on Left Behind, which does add depth to Ellie's character, but still not needed. So that was really poorly handled. If it was like a few more episodes, it wouldn't bother me as much, but the fact that 2 filler episodes in a 9-episode season isn't a good thing. Then you got episode 8, which just rushes through everything, and then you got episode 9, which just rushes through everything. This show is atrocious with pacing. And it took me a while to figure it out, but I think it was on episode 8. I was actually watching Jeremy John's review, and there was a comment, and I wish I wrote down the username, but he pinpointed it for me. It cuts from cutscene to cutscene, and all that in between time, they just metagrade to like nothing. When that in between time is where the most character development happens. So by getting rid of the action and the horror, you also get rid of lots of the character development. So in some ways, it kind of just feels like Greatest of Last of Us. Like, you're just skipping to each individual cutscene with very little connective tissue. So, just terribly handled. And like, also at the same time though, if you ask me what happened in episodes 6, 7, if you ask me what happened in most episodes of this season, I could say, almost nothing. And it still feels like this entire season takes place in the span of a month. So that's not good. Also, the writing, not subtle at all. Here's a few things I wrote down. In the first episode, Tess is like, I'd like to go home and drink until my face stops hurting. Marlene describes the fireflies in great detail. Joel sleeps and you can hear the flashback of Sarah. You don't have to show that. Joe attacking the guy has a flashback to Sarah. Could we not figure it out? And is it his fatherly instincts kicking in already for Ellie? Bill's note is screaming the themes of the show. Characters say exactly how they feel. Joe and Ellie's relationship forming through bad jokes is actually terrible and just. It's a very blatant way to try to build a rapport between the two of them. In the last episode, it wasn't time. Like, how did Neil Druckmann, I disagree with him politically, which I'll get to soon, but the guy is a brilliant storyteller, so how did he have a hand in this? It's just not subtle. There's so many other examples I could have used, but it was embarrassing how bad it was. And let's compare it to the game a bit more for a second, because they made a big deal about the fact there's no spores in this game. Instead, it's going to be tendrils. For it to come and play only for one moment. Are you fucking kidding me? All that fuss over that? And because you got rid of spores, the threat is once again absent throughout, and the tendrils, they don't come across them almost at all as well. So just like some good ideas, but just terribly handled. Ellie's bite mark revealed in episode 1 was very rushed. It has no weight behind it, and honestly, her bite mark doesn't look as gross as it should. The ambush scene in episode 4 is atrocious. I also found the hunters to be less interesting here. Like, they try to flesh them out, but it doesn't work. Like, there's a lot more depth and nuance to them in the game just through reading notes, and I feel like you could have communicated that a bit better. Ellie killing that one dude to protect Joel. Like, she doesn't even kill him, and it's supposed to have weight, but, like, they act like she killed him, but she didn't, and it's just like, okay, which one are you going with? And they just compared to the game where it's just like, you know what? No. How about thanks, Ellie? It was either him or me. I would have much preferred that. It's much better writing, and I know it's not always fair to compare to the game, but this show is just lacking in every regard, and when I have some way to measure the same story being done infinitely better, then I'm going to use that measure. The university injury is laughably bad. The entire winter segment is just underwhelming. And the hospital, like I said, is just bad, so yeah. The musical score by Gustavo Santaolalla is excellent. I love the score to the games. Allowed to Be Happy is one of my favorite pieces of music. They overuse Vanishing Grace, but I will say that I kind of wanted more original music from him. It's all just stuff I'm already familiar with. Another big issue I have is, I'm just going to be honest, watching this show made me realize I didn't actually want this show. I always said they should have made a Last of Us show to focus on different people in this post-apocalypse world, and then they announced Joel and Ellie, and I got excited, and no, I was initially right. Just Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker will always be my Joel and Ellie, and I know it's not fair to compare them, I try to avoid it, but perfect performances against anything less just makes it stand out all the more. And if I ever want to experience this story, I'll always pick the game. And it just like, you know, both stories are told in a visual medium, so the comparison's completely fair. And if you're typing in, then just go play the game. Okay, I will. Like, I prefer the game, but I'm still reviewing the show. I was hoping to love this show, but I don't. But let's get into the thing that will piss off a lot of people, and it's the politics. I was debating whether or not to even discuss these points because it's regarding such touchy subject matter. But let's go into it. Like I said, I love Last of Us 1 and 2. Both of those games have progressive elements. Last of Us 2, you got a character, Lily or Lev, and the game never represents her worldview as correct, but it only asks you to understand and to sympathize for her. So it doesn't bother me. You also got yourself a lesbian relationship in Last of Us 2, and both characters are just handled with such depth and nuance. It doesn't feel like they're pandering. At no point do they talk about the hardships of being a lesbian couple. That's just the way the relationship is. It's there. And it doesn't draw attention to it. You just got yourself two great characters and a really well written relationship. But here, the politics are pretty obvious. Bill and Frank's episode was to strictly showcase a gay romance. And if you don't got an issue with that, that's perfectly okay. But don't act like it was anything more than pandering. And I've seen lots of people comment on my video and others, oh, you're homophobic if you don't want to watch two grown men kiss. No. There is nothing wrong with not wanting to watch two grown men kiss. That's perfectly fine. If you say that you want gay people to die, well then that's wrong and you shouldn't say that. Know the difference. I'll also add in the fact that the two filler episodes focus on a gay romance does feel like virtue signaling. And like, Bill's gay in the game, but it's just a side note. It's not important to his character. His character was someone who pushed everyone else away and focused on his own survival. And the kind of man that mindset creates. And you don't get any of that here. They completely rewrote the character to just lean into this one small fact of his character as much as possible. But I think the thing that actually pissed me off most in episode 3 was the romanticization of suicide. Frank is sick, so he wants to be euthanized. And he wants Bill to be the one to kill him, and Bill doesn't want to live a life without Frank, so he kills himself too. And it's played out to be romantic with the most sappy and over-the-top music played. I know it's the same music from Arrival, which I love, but still. And it's just disgusting. Like, no. You keep fighting for the next day. You don't just give up and kill yourself. And the fact is that this show actually agrees with me. In episode 7, Wiley says how you need to fight. Fight for every next day. In episode 9, Joe talks about how he tried to kill himself and how he's glad that he survived. And it ends with him saying, you keep finding something to fight for. That is powerful. Because we all get moments where we just feel down and depressed. And you have to keep moving forward. That is a strong message. But telling people that if your loved one wants to die, you should kill him. And because you don't want to live without him, you should kill yourself too. I fucking despise that. I'm also going to say that this show goes out of its way to try to be pro-communism in episode 6. Now, to be fair, Joe does come up with a rebuttal against it, but if you listen to the podcast, they're very clearly pro-communist, and they even went out of the way to showcase just how perfect it is. Communism is something that has killed millions of people, so, you don't really seem to want to mention that. This show also adds an addition to David's character of making him a Christian, because they hate Christianity and they want to portray it in a very negative light. And it's just a cliche that has been ran down to the ground at this point, and I'm just tired of it. Even Rainn Wilson himself, who is no conservative by any means, pointed this out, and I completely agree with him in this one regard. They just want to portray anyone who thinks differently than them as evil. He even said in the podcast that they wanted to show that the separation of church and state was essential, and how theocracies always fall apart, or communist communities ran by women in a democracy will always thrive. And this is when you're writing, trying to showcase your worldview as much as possible, and it's just so transparent. And notice how David is the only white straight male? They changed everyone else, but they kept as the white straight male. And I hate to be this guy because I feel like this argument is overused nowadays. But they changed Joel and Tommy to Hispanic, I believe. Then they changed Sarah to black. They changed Maria to black. So almost everyone is changed. And before you type in, oh, well, Gavin, it's not about the race, it's about who's best for the job. If they did that to Sam and Henry, you would be furious. I don't mind if you change characters' races every now and again, but you're going out of your way to avoid any characters being white. And the one character who is white, straight, male is an evil pedophile. That is an intentional decision. And I was debating whether or not I'll bring up this last point, but I'm going to. Bella Ramsey has a YouTube channel called United Hope, where she talks about her Christian worldview. And Pedro Pascal is very openly for the Alphabet Squad. And they've said that they talked about gender identity and sexuality on set, which is just so inappropriate. Especially when you consider their age difference and the fact it's a workplace. But now Bella Ramsey identifies as a they-them. I'm not going to say anything further, but I think you can get what I'm implying, and I just think it's gross. Truly. So, so the political side of things aside, I do still love the video games. Yes, they're progressive, but the characters in the story always came first. It handles every theme with a level of nuance, where it doesn't say what's right and what's wrong. Everybody has strengths, everybody has weaknesses, and it just showcases that so perfectly. And none of that level of quality is brought over to this show. It is a lesser version of the same story in every way. I do not care about these characters, despite two of them being my two favorite characters of all time. I do not buy their relationship, which this entire story is reliant on, and which will lessen the impact of any future seasons. It is terribly paced, it is void of any of the action and horror that I love about the original story, and the performances almost all fall flat. There are some good elements, but this is not one of the best video game adaptations. I'd say it's one of the worst. So I'm going to go ahead and give The Last of Us Season 1 a 2 out of 10. Okay, have you seen Last of Us Season 1? What did you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for some more videos soon. And Gavin,